My name is Mark Rienzi. I'm a professor of law at the Catholic University of America, and I'm the president of the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty. And I'm here really to talk to you about and introduce you to and ask some questions of Bill Saunders, who runs the Masters of Human Rights program at Catholic University. So let me start by introducing Bill. Bill's a professor at Catholic University. He's part of the Institute for Human Ecology, and he runs the Master of Arts program in Human Rights. So welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Mark. Glad to be with you.
Great. And tonight I'll be asking Bill some questions so that we can talk through the purpose of the MA program in human rights, why it's relevant today, what the curriculum and opportunities look like, and then maybe some nuts and bolts about how people would go about applying to it. You can feel free to submit any questions that you have in the GoToWebinar panel at any time during this presentation, and we will try to answer them all at the end. So Bill, let me start with this. Why don't you tell us why have a master's program in human rights?
Well, I'm a lawyer, as you know, and I've been in public policy work in in Washington, D.C. for over 30 years. I also came into the Catholic Church about 25 years ago, and I've worked in human rights that whole time. And I saw, as I was working in human rights, that there was an incredible congruence between international human rights standards and Catholic social teaching. And I thought that but yet you never hear that perspective. You often hear a very counter perspective, almost as if the Catholic contribution is negative. So I wanted to set up the program to help train young people to bring that perspective to bear in the public conversation. So it's human rights from a kind of Catholic perspective, but that doesn't mean it's a narrow kind of churchy perspective. It's the great treasury of Catholic social thought and great Catholic intellectual tradition, which is largely congruent with what we call Western civilization.
Great. I understand the program has taken Saint Josephine Becket as the patron saint. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I actually have this little booklet here. I want to show it in case people listening don't know Saint Becket. She is within the Catholic Church the patroness of against human trafficking, of the movement against trafficking in human people. And she originally was from Sudan. She herself was enslaved against her will, sold, mistreated, abused. She ended up in Italy and was introduced to a convent there, and she refused to accompany her slave owners, who were Italians, back to Sudan, and the Archbishop of Venice intervened on her behalf, and she was set free, and she remained with that convent, which is the Canossian Sisters, and she became a saint. When I have a lot of experience in human rights work, and a lot of it's in Sudan and fighting against slavery and genocide there. And the first time I went to Sudan, when I didn't know anything I just told you, the people there would seek the intercession of, at that time, Blessed Becket. And she was subsequently canonized. You can see a picture of it here. And I was there in Rome for the canonization. And so she's a great saint, particularly for Northern and Eastern Africa. So she was the perfect patroness, as far as I'm concerned, for a human rights program that looks to the inspiration of Catholic social teaching.
That's terrific. Can you tell us, if when students come to that program, can you tell us a little bit about what makes it different from other human rights programs, and what kind of professional opportunities does going through this kind of program offer those students? And actually, before you answer that, I should say, one of the things I've really liked and what brought me to talking to Bill about this program is I've had the benefit of having a lot of these students in my law school classes. So they sometimes Bill students take my constitutional law classes, or they do events with the Center for Religious Liberty. So I've had the benefit and the enjoyment of having these students taking classes alongside with my law students. But can you just tell us, like, what are the professional opportunities the students get at this program that maybe they wouldn't get from some other master's program?
Let's enter that question a couple of different angles. The first thing is, like you indicated, Mark, being a Catholic university is a unique experience because there is my Center for Human Rights, the master's program in human rights, but there's also a Center for Religious Liberty at the law school, a center in business, program in business and human rights at the business school. My program, the master's program, is interdisciplinary, so it calls on philosophy, theology, law, canon law, business, and also political theory. So at Catholic, you have a lot going on in the area of human rights. And one of our lecturers my students take is former Ambassador Sam Brownback, who was a senator from Kansas and was then the U.S. Ambassador for International Religious Freedom. And my students get to take a course with him. And another thing, I'm going to mention a couple of things quickly and kind of come back to them. Another thing is you get to study with this guy, whose name is Chen Guangcheng. He is the Barefoot Lawyer. As you can see, this is his memoir, and you can also see you may be able to see he wears sunglasses. He's a blind man from China, and he is one of the 2 or 3 most outstanding dissidents against the Chinese Communist Party. He also teaches in the program. So in addition to people like you, Mark, and Ambassador Brownback, we have Chen Guangchen, and we also have incredible opportunities because we're in Washington, D.C., and because I've been involved in human rights for 30 years, to meet with other people and other, both in government, out of government, in NGOs, out of NGOs. For instance, we met with Lee Edwards from the Heritage Foundation, who's a great expert on communism. And my students get to and he's the founder of the Victims of Communism Museum here in DC. So one of the things that makes the program unique is, or a second thing, first thing being the incredible kind of ferment at Catholic University itself, is that in the DC area, there's so many prominent human rights people. And part of our program is we go and meet with those people and the students learn from them. And then some of them come and teach a class or two for me, like Dr. Edwards will probably teach a class for me in the spring. Robert George from Princeton will probably teach a class for me in the spring. Gerard Bradley from Notre Dame Law School may teach a class for me in the spring. Nicholas Eberstadt from the American Enterprise Institute, who is the world's foremost authority on demographic issues, will probably teach a class, or is going to teach a class for us. Kevin Flannery, who is a world-renowned philosopher at the Gregorian University in Rome, is going to teach a class for us. So that's another unique thing. And then I also want to add to that, I have a board of advisors for my program, and that board of advisors is composed of persons who I think are the leading human rights people in the world. For instance, Marianne Glendon, who I know Mark worked with when he was at Harvard. She is, for those of you that don't know who she is, she headed up the First Vatican delegation to an international conference. She served on 2 Vatican consistories at the same time. She is emeritus professor at Harvard Law School and is really the great leader. She's the former chair of the U.S. Commission on International Human Rights. So she's on it. Robert George is on it. Kevin Flannery, the philosopher I mentioned, is on it. Tom Farr, who runs the Religious Freedom Institute here in Washington, whom Mark knows, and Mark knows all these people, but also Tom works with us some in our religious liberty work, and other people like that. Helen Alvarez from George Mason, who's one of the leading pro-life and pro-family lawyers in the world, is on it. So one of the things that makes this unique is the opportunity to learn from, to get to know, and those people. Now, all of this leads to the kind of professional opportunities that you alluded to a second ago, Mark, which means basically you are making contacts with people who are doing what you want to do if you're studying human rights. And you will have, I mean, it's unpredictable, as Mark can tell you in his own life. Most things are unpredictable. I mean, you can set a general kind of path, but exactly what happens, you can't predict. So I actually met Mark when he first came to Washington, and now, however many years this is later, 20 years later or something, we're working together at Catholic University. We couldn't have predicted that, right?
We were kids. We were kids back then.
Yeah, you were a kid. I was middle-aged, but yeah. So, but the point is, it's invaluable to be in a situation where you can learn from people and make contacts with people, not in some kind of utilitarian way to use them for your benefit, but to enrich your own life so that you will find your own way. So I think those are some of the things that make it unique. And as I mentioned, the fact we're in Washington, D.C. in some ways makes it unique. And the Catholic social teaching perspective certainly makes it unique.
Yeah, and let me say, I'll, at the risk of embarrassing Bill rattled off the all-star cast of people who are on his advisory board, and they truly are world-renowned, best in the world, best in the country type experts on a variety of human rights topics. So is Bill Saunders. Bill has been at this for decades. He was at this when I showed up in DC 20 years ago. He's been focused on international religious liberty and fighting sex trafficking and human trafficking all over the world. So if you're a student who's interested in learning more about this, I can't think of anybody better, frankly, than Professor Saunders to be your guide at exploring this world, figuring out who's good to meet and who's doing the kind of work you'd want to do. Bill, can we shift gears a little bit and talk some nuts and bolts? Like, can you tell me a little bit, like, what's the curriculum and length of time for a program like this?
It's a master's program. So ordinarily master's programs in the United States take at least a couple of years. We designed this master's program to be, I would say for most people, but not for all, to be done in a year. So we also have, and it's important for people listening who might be working in Washington, D.C. or nearby, we have part-time option. So you can go part-time, and that can take as many years. I mean, it can take up to 5 years. But we have a full-time option, which most people do, which is in 1 year, you get a master's. So it's pretty intense because you have 5 courses per semester. But at the end of that, you have a master's degree. The curriculum is, as I mentioned, interdisciplinary. So you have a course in philosophy and theology. It might be Mark's class. It certainly be a public international law class at the law school. You have political theory class. You might have a class that focuses on Catholic social thought. I have a capstone class, which is the second semester, which pulls everything together. And we do pay attention to the teaching of the popes. So I will weave those things together. And as Mark mentioned, I mean, I'm an international human rights lawyer, when I've been asked over the years, I've done many things, worked in many areas, and people have asked me, what do you describe yourself? Well, I'm a human rights lawyer. And if you come to this program, you'll understand, as I mentioned before, there's an incredible congruence between human rights as captured in the documents after the Second World War and Catholic social thought. So in the program, you'll have these various courses. You will also have an opportunity to do an internship for credit with one of these organizations or one of these people that we encounter. For instance, we just developed a new course at the business school on the human rights, and a couple of my students are doing their internship with that professor in a kind of a new area of the law called ESG. So you have the opportunity to work with people that you respect and want to work with in the future. So that's the curriculum. As I said, kind of in addition to the curriculum is these meetings, which we do weekly. So it's not an occasional thing. So every week we will meet with someone, for instance, like Tom Farth, the Religious Freedom Institute, or Lee Edwards at the Heritage Foundation. We'll meet with people who work in the US government, particularly on Capitol Hill, for congressmen or congresswomen and for committees. We'll meet for current or immediate past members of the executive branch. And why do we do that? Part of the reason is to let the students discover what aspect of human rights they're attracted to or their vocation is in. So you may never have realized there was all this work against human trafficking. Well, in the fall of your semester, we will meet with an anti-trafficking organization. And you may never heard of it, but you may come out of that meeting and think, that's really what I'm called to do. So that's a kind of a general description of the program curriculum.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll have to say, as I hear it, one, I kind of want to sign up and take your program. But two, there really is there's no better place to study international human rights than to come to Washington, D.C., where you've got all these different people and organizations working, as you said, on all these different aspects and types of problems, and really out there looking to do good things in the world and solve them. So it really is a rich place for people to study these things. Bill, can you tell me a little bit about, like who would benefit from this program? Like, who is it? Like, I know who signs up and goes to law school because they end up in my class. Who are the people who are the ideal candidates to come into a program like yours?
The short answer is there's not really one ideal candidate, but there are a number of folks that could really benefit from it. And just preliminarily, I want to say, I don't know if we have any people listening now or maybe subsequently viewing this who are not US citizens or not here in the US, but I have students in my program from other countries. I have a student currently from Brazil. I have one from Chad. I've had them from the Philippines and other countries. So it may be a slightly different answer depending on whether you are from a non-US country. But for instance, the student who graduated from the Philippines, he wanted to go back and he's going to be a professor, but he wants to work with the Bishops' Conference in the Philippines. Now, other students want to start their own organizations in other countries. But for a US citizen, say somebody who is just graduating from college or has graduated the last couple of years and maybe wants to reorient their career, I think that this program could be helpful in many, many, many ways. If, for instance, I have another person in the program who works with an NGO, and it's a Catholic NGO, but it doesn't have to be. But many NGOs pay for their employees to get graduate degrees because it helps it's kind of the professional development, career development for their employee. So you could be in a job now, and you want to augment what you've learned before, or maybe learn some new things, and it may be very well that your employer would pay for it. It could also be if you're somebody just out of college or you want to make a career change, you could come out of this job and, like I said, seek employment on Capitol Hill, which means with the Congress, with a committee. They have entry-level people. You don't have to be a world-class expert, but through our contacts, you'll get the best chance to get such a job. Or you could go to work with a think tank. I would say at least 40% of my students go on to more further graduate work, usually for a PhD, and the subjects vary quite a bit. So, and I've had students who wanted to come to learn more about Catholic social thought, perhaps what they'd studied as undergraduates, had not paid much attention to this, or maybe they'd been in a specialized program that didn't pay much attention to this. And that's a pretty good opportunity, because we're going to look at Catholic social thought very, very closely. And you could work for a bishop's conference, you could work for a local diocese, you could work for any kind of nonprofit, human rights, or relief organizations like Catholic Relief Services or something like that. So I think that really that's kind of the career path. But that's a lot of variety. So that means the students can come from a lot of different perspectives. In other words, you don't have to have taken 3 pre-law classes and have an LSAT score of X. You don't have, but I am going to look at that you're a serious student and that you have a serious reason for being in the program. But other than that, I think there's a lot of flexibility. We have had students right out of college. We've had students who've worked for several years. We've had students, like I said, from different countries and different cultures. I think the one thing that the kind of most important thing is you have to care about human rights from the Catholic perspective. You can go to any human rights program in the country, and there are a lot of them, and get the standard secularized version. You come to my program, you're going to learn everything those folks know about the law, but you're going to understand it in a deeper, richer way with the perspective of Catholic thought.
Great. And you hit some of these, but I just want to make sure, in case someone's looking for the details on this, can you just run through, like, what are the application requirements? What is it somebody has to do if they listen to all this and they decide they'd like to be part of the program?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing is just the webpage, which is easy to remember. It's MAhumanrights, so Master of Arts, MAhumanrights.com. Go to that page and you can find out everything you need to know, including my email address. You can always send me an email, but also at that page, you can begin the application process. So we are still accepting applications for next fall. And you'll have to submit your undergraduate transcript, 3 letters of recommendation, your personal statement as to why you want to study in this program. Also, all applicants, once they've completed those formalities, has to have an interview with me so we can mutually discern whether you're an appropriate person to have in the program. I mean, another advantage of the program, if you do it full time, is you're with a group of people. It's a small, we try keep it small, 5, 6, 7 people, but you all come in at the same time. You have the same classes. So like people like Professor Rienzi will know, this is the MA students. So you form an identity and you help one another through the program. Those are the particular requirements I recall at the moment. There might be something else, but that's generally it. And if you want to review them, go to the webpage. If you have a question, send me an email.
Great. And can you repeat the website again one more time, Bill, just so people can make sure they get it down?
So, like I said, it's like Master of Arts. So it's MA Human Rights, one word, MAhumanrights.com. And that'll take you right to all the information you need.
Terrific. Okay, let's talk money. I understand that you've got a discounted rate over other graduate programs. How does that work? Are there scholarships available? Tell us what people would want to know about money.
Yes, we have a discounted tuition at Catholic because this is seen as an important program at the university. And then we have scholarships. Scholarships, every student will get some form of scholarship through who's admitted to the program, and it will cover at least 50 to 60% of the tuition. It may cover more. It's a combination of merit-based and need. There have been students who've come through the program who've gotten almost complete tuition help, and others who've gotten, like I said, about at least 50 or 60%. All I can say is, this is the 4th year of the program, and we've had plenty of students who are able to do that. You won't finish the program and have crushing debt.
That's terrific. That's a good way to do it. You want people to be able to go take the good jobs, to do the good kind of work that you're preparing them for. Can you tell us a little bit about application deadline dates? What's the priority deadline, or is there a drop dead deadline? And do you want it in by a certain time for financial aid considerations? Can you tell people those things?
Well, the sooner the better. We start giving out scholarships in February, probably near the end of February, but you want to get it in as soon as possible. They're drop dead application dates, which are in the summer. But I wouldn't advise you to wait till then, because the scholarships fund, it depends. If you don't need a scholarship, you can wait, but scholarship funds are likely to have been allocated before we get to the summer. So you want to get it in as soon as you can, if not certainly this month or by the middle of next month, but you can do it subsequently, and we may have scholarship funds, but it's kind of a gamble.
Great. Okay, so folks should get their applications moving if they'd like to do that this year. Okay, well, we're ready and able to take questions from the group. I know that there's at least something queued up in the Q&A section. So if folks have questions, please go ahead and enter them in that Q&A section, and I will quiz Bill, and we'll get you the answers to the things you're wondering about. So the one that we've got teed up here says, is there any possibility that we can get a brochure about the subjects, price, scholarship opportunities for this master's program? So is there a brochure, and where might people find it?
Well, there is a brochure, but you can, I suppose, email us to get a brochure, but if you have, and you must, if you're listening to us, have access to a computer, you really ought to take a look at the webpage, because everything you need to know is there. There's nothing in the brochure that's not on the webpage. But if you want a physical brochure, we can send you one. But I think the best thing to do would be, even so, to go to that MA Human Rights, get my email address, and send me an email and say you want a brochure. We're happy to send you one.
Terrific. Another question that I've heard people ask is, how new is the program, and what has job placement been like so far?
Yeah, well, it's new. This is the 4th class going through, but of course, everybody listening knows that we had 2 years of COVID right in the middle of it. So I don't think there's any typical, I think that the lessons that can be drawn are very kind of limited. And students have done everything I mentioned. Some have gone on to graduate school, some have gone to law school, some have gone to PhD programs. Some are working for nonprofits. Some are working with human rights organizations. And it's just a variety of things. The one thing, I mean, folks listening can decide for themselves about whether this is an advantage or not, but this program allows you to find your own place in all this. And with my contacts and everything, we can certainly help you work in the areas you want to work in. But it's not a predetermined program. If you went to medical school, you're going to be a doctor, either in a hospital or in a private practice. This is, in a certain sense, as we say in the USA, which I say for people who might be listening who are not Americans, the sky's the limit. There's no limit to it. It's really, you got to find your, in Catholic terms, your vocation. What are you being called to do? And this, I can't begin to delineate all those things. But if you want to work in the U.S. government, in Congress, we have all contacts, in NGOs, at the Bishops' Conference. 2 of my graduates last year are working at the U.S. Conference for Catholic Bishops right now. So, sky's the limit.
Great. Speaking of sky's the limit, somebody posted in the questions, is this program suitable for older people looking for a career change or not? How do you feel about that?
I think yes, I think it is. There's older people of all ages, right? There's older people who are 30 and have done something for 5 or 6 or 8 years and want to change. And there are older people of, 30 years who want to change. So those are different considerations. But I think the only thing as an older person you need to think about is whether, the longer you live, the more responsibilities you have. So, this isn't, like I said, you don't walk out of this program and necessarily have a job doing X. So there's a certain amount of uncertainty, which may be appropriate more for a younger person who doesn't have responsibilities. But you could also be at a point in your life where you don't have to worry about those responsibilities anymore, but you want to do something that calls to your heart more. And this would be appropriate for you. And also, if you're an older person who's in the Washington, D.C. area, you can take it part-time. You don't have to leave what you're doing. So if you want to be, more cautious about it and want to see, whether this leads you to something else or more deeply into what you're doing, or if you want a cushion while you figure out what you want to do next, then you can take it as a part-time course. You just have to get the agreement of your employer. But we have had students, and it hasn't been a problem. Because if you go part-time, you're taking only one or the most 2 classes per semester, which you can handle. Most employers are going to be reasonable enough to, you might have to make up the time, but they'll give you the time to do it.
Terrific. Someone else asked in the Q&A section, can the course be done remotely or do you need to be in DC?
It cannot currently be remotely, although we're having conversations about that. I anticipate we will develop a remote option, but it's not available right now. But you keep your eye on the website. Like I said, it's in conversation.
Great. And I would just say, I would also encourage folks, to the extent you can get to DC to do something like this live, I think there really are a lot of great opportunities with the people you can meet around here doing wonderful human rights work if you can get to DC. That's all I've got for the questions posted in the chat. Bill, is there anything else that you think folks should know about the program?
Well, I was going to mention this book, which is a book that I was the co-editor of, and I wrote a chapter, and it's called Unborn Human Life and Fundamental Rights. And John Finnis, if you know anything about the law, he's I think it's fair to say, one of the, if not the leading legal philosopher in the world. This is the kind of thing that's important to us, because human rights begins with the dignity of each human being. And you can't deny that for anybody based on race or culture or age or a state of dependency. If you start to deny some people the protection of the law, you put in place a principle by which nobody is safe, and it becomes simply the rule of powerful people over not powerful people. And you may be kind of comfortably powerful now, but if forces shift, you may find yourself on the outside. So we have to have a principle of equality under law and what's called rule of law, which means the powerful people are limited by the law, just like everybody else is limited by the law. So I do want to mention that in addition to St. Becket, the other two guiding lights really of our program are Mother Teresa, who I assume you all know who she is. She's called sometimes now Teresa of Calcutta. When I was coming along, she was called Mother Teresa. She is a great, person who devoted herself to helping the poorest of the poor, the abandoned, dying people in Calcutta. And it's just based on that understanding, because there's nobody, it's hard to think of anybody less powerful than somebody who's dying and is so, is left on the street to die. Well, for her and for the Catholic perspective, that person is as valuable as anybody you can think of, including me, including you, including any of the people I mentioned, any of these famous people I mentioned. And the other person in the guiding light of the program is John Paul II, St. Pope John Paul II. When John Paul II became Pope in 1978, he wrote his first encyclical, and it's called Redemptor Hominis, the Redeemer of Man. And most of you listening will be too young to remember this, but I remember this, which is the world was divided between East and West, the Soviet bloc and the free world, or whatever, the non-Soviet nations, the West, both with nuclear weapons, both at kind of pointed swords, and it was a Cold War, which means what it says. It's a war. It just wasn't a shooting war, but it was a war. And the whole world kind of hung in the balance, because if it became a hot war, it was the end of the world because of all those nuclear weapons. And so he becomes Pope in that situation, and just on the horizon, about 20 years away, is the dawning of the next millennium, the year 2000. So this is, a new Pope with all these things, all these incredible issues. And he writes this first encyclical. And it's, of course, about Jesus as the Redeemer of man. And the key to understanding the Second Vatican Council is man is the way of the church, because Christ redeemed the human race. But anyway, John Paul II writes about this, but he ends it talking about human rights. I think it's section 17 of his encyclical. And he talks about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which we study closely in our program. And he says, this is the Catholic perspective, which is the church doesn't impose, it proposes. So John Paul II proposes a deeper way to understand human rights, and it's from the Catholic perspective. And I can tell you personally, from my over 30 years of doing human rights, that's exactly what is needed and exactly what is lacking, is a deeper understanding of human rights. Human rights is not a synonym for special pleading for whatever you want to specially plead for. It's about understanding the human being in the context of community and working for a common good that transcends selfish interests because of your solidarity with the poor, with the suffering, with the people on the streets in Calcutta that Mother Teresa saved, and doing it in a way that is effective, which is the Catholic principle of subsidiarity. I don't have to do everything. You don't have to do everything. We figure out what's the best level to do it. It might be an international organization, or it might be a pregnancy resource center in your hometown. It might be working with Mark Rienzi at the Becket Fund, but it might be being a lawyer in a law firm who gives, 5 hours a month to pro bono work. So things are done at different levels, but in solidarity with one another, because God's created us and loved us enough to die for us. So that's the Catholic perspective. And that's what we're going to do. And if that interests you, come to the program. But I will say, if that doesn't interest you, don't come. Don't apply. You can go anywhere else in this country and get the other perspective. The only place you can get that perspective is in my program.
Terrific, Bill. We've got one last question that came up in the chat. Stella asks, I'm from an English-speaking country, Nigeria. Do I need to submit proof of English? Yes, you do. And you need to go on the webpage again and look these things up. There's some requirements for international students, such as a TOEFL score or another score that's the equivalent. And then your scores have to be evaluated. I mean, your grades and everything. There's international organizations that evaluate those, because we do you no favor if we admit you in a program that you are not prepared for. That would be the worst disservice we could do for anybody. So yes, you have to show English proficiency. Your grades have to be compared to others, so we get a sense of whether you can do the work. You can find all of that on the webpage, which is MAhumanrights, one word, MAhumanrights.com. Great. And if you've got students who can pass those things and show that they can do the work, then my understanding is you're thrilled and welcoming to have students from all over the world come to participate in this program, right? Human rights really are for everybody. Yep. We're happy to have non-American students. Terrific. Great. Okay. I think that's all that we've got in terms of questions from the group. I'll just say, for me personally, I knew a little bit about this program because I get the pleasure of teaching the students sometimes, but it was really fun for me to get to hear all the details about it and all the exciting opportunities. And thank you, Bill, for giving the time to explain it so that people can learn more about it. Again, if folks want to learn more about it, let me tell you 3 ways you can. One, if you missed any part of this video, it'll be available on the website, MAhumanrights.com. 2, that website otherwise has a lot of information about the program. So even if you're not coming to watch this video again, go to MAhumanrights.com to learn more. And 3, you can always contact Bill Saunders, who's the program director. His email address is SaundersWL. So that's SAUNDERSWL, SaundersWL, at CUA, Catholic University of America, at CUA.edu. That's Saunders, WL, at CUA.edu or MAhumanrights.com. And we would love to hear from you and hear your questions and see your applications. With that,
we're happy to answer. Yeah, we're happy to answer questions. I mean, you know, if you can't find it on the webpage, send us an email, but go to the webpage first, because I think you're going to find, you know, as I said, this is the 4th year. So we've been refining it as we go along. You can find out about the faculty, the people I mentioned, and anything else. So anyway, I invite, if you're interested from the Catholic perspective on human rights, which I think is frankly the right perspective. Other perspectives are too shallow. You understand the theological reasons for human rights, the philosophical reasons for human rights. That gives you an understanding that most people can't match and should make you quite formidable in your conversations.
And it's only available at the Catholic University Masters in Human Rights program. It's not the same as what you get at any other American university.
It really isn't. And it's very exciting to be at a place with folks like Mark Rienzi and Sam Brownback and Chen Guangcheng and other people. I don't think you can find that anywhere else. And when you add to that the fact you're in Washington, D.C., which is, you know, obviously the capital of the United States and one of the most important places in the world to make a difference on policy, I don't think you can find a better human rights program.
Terrific. Well, with that, why don't we wrap it up? Thank you very much, everybody, for participating, and we hope to hear more from you in the future. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Bill.